Good morning, church. It's a beautiful day, really beautiful sky, beautiful clouds in the sky today, bright and blue and beautiful. We're going to talk today about body life. If you were ever in the military, a lot of other football teams and all that have what's called the buddy system, where you have to have somebody to help you and you work through your routines and you work through your stuff and you work through life and you work through difficult events and dangerous things with a buddy. And 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, "Therefore, encourage one another, build up one another. We urge you, brethren," verse 14 says, "admonish the unruly, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, and be patient with everyone." There's more than 50 one another's in the whole Bible, 13 brilliant ones in the New Testament church dialogue that says we're supposed to help each other. I've always been fascinated by the two disciples who turned on Jesus at the last moment, at the moment where in Jesus' life, where he was the most tried. He had two disciples turn on him. Judas, the obvious one, forsook him, betrayed him, and for the greed of 30 pieces of silver, gave away the location of Jesus to the Pharisees, who arrested him and tried and executed him. And we all know that Judas first tried to return the money because of the remorse that he felt. He was ashamed of what he had done. So he was going through a whole lot himself. But then Matthew 25 says he went out and he hung himself for all this guilt. You can pretty much surmise from that he didn't think it all the way through, that he didn't imagine the arrest would be as severe, the punishment and the death sentence, all that would come. So at some point, when he thought it was totally unfair and Jesus was being treated illegal and unfair, he took that upon himself, and the weight was too much for him to bear, and he took his own life. But Peter's the other disciple who abandoned the pathway of following Jesus. Even in Scripture, it seems like a little bit earlier, he became the disciple who, in Matthew 16, disagrees with God's plan for Jesus. That's when Jesus tells him he's going to go to the cross, he's going to be arrested by the Pharisees, crucified by the Romans. He's going to be buried but come back in 3 days. And Peter says, no, that can't happen. We don't want that to happen. It's when Jesus says, get behind me. You're thinking like men, see things as God sees them. And that's the path where Peter kind of gets off base from that point on. A short time later, he's trying to murder a Jewish man in the garden with a sword after Jesus had specifically spent hours telling the disciples that we would be known by our sacrificial love. He denied knowing Christ. He would not declare Christ as his Lord in front of the people in the courtyard there. So he had his 3 denials, and then he walked away from his call to discipleship in John 21 and went back to fishing. So you have Judas and Peter sort of in contrast to each other. And fortunately, Jesus pursues Peter, recalls him to love Jesus more than these boats. Do you love me more than these fishing boats that you've built your career around and you've gone back to? Is it going to be fishing for fish or fishing for men? That's a whole brilliant story. But I just want to finish out by saying what I want to note here is I've meditated on all these two followers who were followers of Christ, and they were in crisis of their faith. One chose a path of solitude and isolation. He pulled away from the other disciples. He let his shame and regrets impact himself, and he was in a very desperate situation, but no one was near him to help him, counsel him, stop him, or encourage him. The other disciple, Peter, even in his guilt and failure, we find him in the upper room with the disciples. We find him after Jesus had been entombed with the disciples, but then we also find him even after he's quit and gone back to fishing. He took his disciple friends with him fishing. So he's staying in a group setting of believers. So keeping good men around you, even when you're struggling, is so important to help your faith walk continue. Jesus' brother James, James 3:1 says, we all stumble in many ways, but to stumble alone and isolate leads to tragic ends. So guys, I'm asking you, don't get isolated. Don't get separated from the flock, from the fold, from the fellowship. That's why the New Testament epistles loaded with one another's love one another, encourage one another, edify, build up one another, restore one another, rebuke one another. Be devoted to one another, comfort one another, honor one another, forgive one another, speak to one another with grace. Those are the ways we, in fellowship with each other, help each other through these crises of faith and through these dark times. Our fellowship is our buddy system. It's very biblical and very effective. So find a group of men and women who can support and encourage you. Stick to them like glue even when there's challenges, and grow in your faith. Love you guys. See you back soon.